Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and in this video we're going to be talking all about ISOs on a modified PlayStation 3. So, of course, you are going to need your PlayStation 3 here, and it will need to be either jailbroken or running PS3HEN. Now, there are a few other qualifications as well. If you are using PS3HEN, first of all, this method I'm going to show in this video will not work for PlayStation 2 ISO games. Again, this will not work for PlayStation 2 ISO games, what I'm about to explain right here. If you have a jailbroken PS3, you would need a custom firmware with Cobra enabled on it. That will allow us to actually mount and run the ISOs. So for example, if you followed one of my PlayStation 3 jailbreaking tutorials, and you followed along and installed a Cobra enabled custom firmware, or you installed Rebug which has Cobra in it, you'll be able to work with this just fine. If you are going through this video and you're not able to mount your ISOs, you probably don't have Cobra on your custom firmware, or it has not been enabled. Now to get started, we're going to need to download a few applications, and we're also going to need to have a USB drive on hand, and perhaps two if you don't want to, keep formatting. So we would need FAT32 available to us in order to transfer over and install a couple applications we need. And then after that, you can either use the same or a different USB drive if you're going to format it to NTFS or exFAT. FAT32 works as well, but if you're dealing with ISO-based games, you're probably going to be dealing with files that are larger than 4 GB in size. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and move over to our PC. Over at the PC, there's going to be a few things you can download, which will be down below in the description. So first of all, you will need webMAN mod for this. So webMAN mod, just get the latest version of it, as well as prepISO. Now, if you're going to be doing PSP games and you have any interest in that, it would be recommended to download both the PSP Minis launcher as well as the PSP Remasters launcher. You could just download those 4 things here and get the latest versions of them all. If you intend to play PS3 games using this method and you have your PS3 games in a folder format, such as if you followed my multi-man tutorial and you saw how I was backing up my games and such with that, they will need to be in ISO format for this. So to make this easy, I will show you how to change those into ISO format or repack them, and it's really easy to do using PS3 ISO tools. You can simply click download now and save it somewhere you can easily find it. Alright, so for the actual applications, you should have webMAN and prepISO, and both the PSP launchers if you're going to be doing that. And you'll also need your FAT32 formatted USB drive. As you can see, mine has already been formatted to FAT32. If you want to transfer these over another way, you're more than welcome to, but at the beginning we would need this. So if you have modified your PS3 before, you're familiar with getting that set up. So now what we can do is just go into our flash drive and copy over all 4 of these applications. Once we have these package files loaded over, we can just come back here, right click, safely eject our flash drive and move it to the PS3. Over at your PS3, once you have your flash drive hooked up and recognized here, just go to Package Manager, Install Package Files, Standard, and install webMAN mod first. And of course, if you're using PS3HEN, it's going to be a given. You will need to enable HEN before doing these installations and before running any of these pieces of homebrew. Once that's installed, go back to Package Manager, Standard, and install prepISO. And of course, if you're going to be doing the PSP games, come in here and install both of these. So now this is how it should look. You should at minimum have these 2, and then if you're doing the PSP games, you'll have these 2 as well. So let's go ahead and install webMAN mod. Now I'd recommend installing the full version of this, and in order to install it, you need to hold down the L button when you're hovered over this, and then tap the X button to install the full version. So there we go, our system has restarted, and as you can see, once it reboots or you enable HEN, it will tell you that webMAN has loaded. Now you're also going to see that webMAN Games is new here, and if your fan is all of a sudden super loud, I will show you all the fan settings there. This will be within webMAN Games, webMAN Setup, and PS3 webMAN Setup. which will open this all up within your browser. So here, mine is thankfully pretty quiet, but this might be set to manual at 35 degrees. So what I typically use, this is actually the settings I use. I do enable dynamic fan control, auto at 68 degrees Celsius, and the PS2 emulator, I make sure to keep that at 40 degrees. Once you have those changed, you can go to Save, and then you can click here to reboot the console. And again, once we've rebooted here and everything kicks in, hopefully your fan speed should decrease, hopefully. But if it is still running really high and running really loud, you might have to open up your PS3 at one point and replace the thermal paste and clean it and do all that fun stuff. I'm of course not going to be covering that here, but that's just a preventive maintenance tip. So there we go, we have all of that set up on the PS3 side. We do have to do a little bit more here, but let's get our games set up on our USB drive. So with that, of course, we need to go back over to our PC and get our USB drive handy. Alright, so over here I have PS3 ISO tools, and I also have a few example games. These are all games that I have backed up myself on their own respective systems, so I've got plenty of guides covering those. But for this, what we can do is get started on copying everything over. So you will need your USB drive, and it can be FAT32 if you want to do this, although you're probably here to use the expanded file systems, which would be NTFS or exFAT. As you can see, this one is NTFS, which is fine, but just want to show you all formatting this for, the sake of the tutorial. If I format this, I'm actually going to do exFAT on here. It doesn't really matter what you pick, just pick whichever you want to. Because this is the default, and just as an example, I'm going to use exFAT, and I'll do default allocation size, quick format is fine, and there we go, everything's been formatted. So we have a completely clean USB drive. So inside of here, you're going to need to make a few folders. So for PS1 Games, you need to create a new folder and call it PSX ISO. All one word, just like that. For PS2 Games, you're going to create a new folder called PS2 ISO, one word, all uppercase. For PS3 Games, pretty easy to guess, but PS3 ISO, all uppercase, one word. And finally, PSP Games, PSP ISO, all uppercase, all one word. So this is what you should look like if you're going to be loading up everything on here. So let's go ahead and tackle PS1 Games first. Now, PS1 Games, they can be in folders like this. As you can see, my Medieval, I have looking like this. I have a bin and Q file, and I also have an image file, which you really don't need on here. I just kind of did that to have the cover art in there, but you can have those two. And for Mega Man Legends, I have the same thing going on here. So I'd actually recommend making a folder for each PS1 game as opposed to just dumping a ton of files in here. So again, you take your PS1 game files and you just put them in their own respective folders. So since I have these two games, I'm just going to simply copy and paste them over. And as you can see, we just have to wait a little bit for this. So there we go. Again, for PS1 games, it's PSX ISO, a folder for each game, and inside of that game, you have your disk there. And if you have multi-disc games, I'd even recommend doing a folder for each disc, just to keep it easy and organized. Now, back here, let's load up a PS2 game. And by the way, I did that first because PS1 is the only system that you can do folders on like this. So it starts and ends with PS1. Everything else, you just have to dump the file into the folder, like the PS2 or PS3 ISO folder. You cannot put the game in its own folder. So back here, let's do a PS2 game. You go into PS2 ISO, and if you have an ISO of a PS2 game, you simply copy and paste it over. This might even be in another format like binQ or something, but regardless of what it is, you take the game and you put it directly in the PS2 ISO folder. So with our PS2 game copied over, we are done. And PSP is going to be the exact same as PS2. You go back here, go to PSP ISO, copy and paste over your PSP ISO file. I know I just skipped over PS3, and that's because I have a little bit more to say on there, so PS3 we're going to do last. But funny thing is, PS2 and PSP are going to pretty much be set up the exact same on here, even in terms of usage, and you all will see that once we get back to the console. Alright, so for our last system, the PS3, what do? Well, there's a direct way and there's a conversion-based way. So the direct way, well, guess what? You go into the PS3 ISO folder, and if you have your game in ISO format, just like all the other games we've been covering, you copy and paste the ISO directly into the PS3 ISO folder. Because this one is much bigger, it's going to take longer, but it's as easy as that. Now, I'm just going to minimize these and let it copy over because this is the other method. Now, if you have an ISO-based game, that's great. But what if you have a game like this? This is my Call of Duty 4, and if we go in here, this game works just fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's been dumped to folder formats where you can actually browse everything and, this is the game itself in folder format, it's not in an ISO. Well, this is exactly why we downloaded PS3 ISO tools. So once you have this downloaded, right-click and extract it using your favorite extraction software. For this, you just need to hop into PS3 ISO tools version 2.2 folder, and there is an exe for this, which you can just double-click. Now it's going to give you a new startup, so press OK. And right here, there's a little bit of setup we need to do. You should set this up for CFW, and the firmware, I know this is going to be outdated, but this really doesn't make a difference. You can select 4.76, but it's not going to make much of a difference here. Just select the latest one available. And then click on Create ISOs. Now for this step, we do not need to patch them. We can rename the ISO and use Make PS3 ISO. So really, this is the only option you have to tick. Even this one is optional, but that's about it on here. I'm just doing this to make it a little bit cleaner. So once you have everything set up, press continue. So now you just need to find the directory where your PS3 game is located, and you need to select the folder itself. Or you can select a whole game archive as it says right here. So for example, if you have a folder full of 20 different folder-based PS3 games and you want to convert all of them to ISO, you can select the whole folder. Otherwise, if you need to only convert one game or, pack it into an ISO, you have to go into that folder and you click on the game itself you want to make into an ISO. Once you select it and press OK, again, this is pretty self-explanatory, you just need to select the directory where you want to save this to. And there we go, once you have it all set up, it is generating as fast as that. That took seconds. You're also going to get this at the end where here it says the game itself, all the other information we have, and the status is OK. So that took just a few seconds here to pack into an ISO file. And as you can see, check this out, I'm gonna exit out of this, but I have my Call of Duty 4 folder, and I have my Call of Duty 4 ISO, and this is what we need. So we're still waiting on this to finish copying, but regardless, if you have an ISO, you just copy and paste it over. If you have a folder-based game, you need to repack it into an ISO using PS3 ISO tools, and then once you get the ISO of that PS3 game, you simply copy and paste it over into the PS3 ISO folder. And that's that. Alright, so we're finally done transferring these over and we have a nice little collection to start off with. So again, this is what your setup should look like. You should have your flash drive or USB drive you're using. Inside of your PS2 ISO folder, you dump the ISO in there. PS3 ISO, you dump the ISO in there. PSP ISO, same story. And PSX ISO, I'd recommend you make a folder for your game, and then you put the files for the game inside of that folder. With all this done, let's right-click, eject our USB drive, and take it over to the PS3. Alright, so over at the PS3, take your USB drive, plug it into your system. It's not going to show up anywhere because it is an unsupported format if you're using exFAT or NTFS. So typically to run your games now, your ISOs, you'll need to go to webMAN Games, and here everything is categorized. And right now this is only showing the games that are installed internally on the system or copied over. So as you can see, I have a copy of Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time on here. And I have a few PS1 games on here. These are games I've already ripped prior to this video directly onto the PS3. But none of our PSP games are showing up. Actually, none of the games on our flash drive are showing up. Well, that is intended. For them to show up, we need to have our flash drive plugged in, and then we need to run prepISO. So just come over to this application and press the X button. So there, it's done. Now, just like webMAN, when you set this up, it just moves you to a black screen and then kicks you back here. And you can test to see if it worked. Come over to webMAN Games, and when you come in here, you should have some updated values. So if you come to here, as you can see, both of my games are there. My PlayStation 2 game is there, my PS1 game is there, this is it, and the PSP game is right there. So that's all working as intended. If that did not work or these are not showing up, I would recommend you restart your console and come back here, and if they're not showing up, try prep NTFS again. Now this is important because the games are not going to automatically update. So if you add 10 more games onto your USB drive, you have to plug your USB drive back in, you have to rerun prepISO, and then it should be updated right here. So anytime you update whatever's on the USB drive, you do have to rerun prepISO. It's just a manual step you have to make. On top of that, you can also run prepISO from webMAN Games, webMAN Setup, and if you install the full version, you'll have it down here. However, if you accidentally install the light version or even chose to, you're not going to have this, plus it's just easier to access it here, which is why I recommended installing it. So let's get to playing some games. And for webMAN Games, here we can just come in, and the easiest is going to be PS3 games. So we can come to PS3, and I have my Call of Duty 4, so just press X. As you can see, you'll see that message there, and it is going to mount the game like a disc. So it now says my Call of Duty 4 has been loaded, and I can just load this up like any other game. So perfect, check this out, the game is booting up and working just fine. Now let's go ahead and try out the others. I'm going to exit out of this, but as you can see, it worked perfectly fine, no issues. Now again, I'll just go up to webMAN Games, PS3, and this time let's load up Deadly Premonition. So the exact same thing happens, it loads it up here, and there we go. Once we have all that ready to go, we can boot this game up. Well, this is a little bit annoying. I totally forgot that this game requires a install at the beginning, so I guess I just have to wait a few more seconds. Alright, and it took a bit for the install, but as you can see, this game is again now up and running, so this is our second PS3 game which worked successfully on here. Let's quit out of this and try the others. Alright, coming back here, let's try a PlayStation 1 game. I'm going to come back to the other two, but for a PlayStation 1 game, this is the one that's on my USB drive. Again, this is pretty easy. You just tap this, wait for it to mount, and there we go, it's been loaded up. Now if you have not played these before, like PlayStation 1 or 2 games, you are going to need to go to the memory card utility and create an internal memory card and set it. So I've already done that here before, but I'm just going to boot this up. And now, as you can see here yet again, the PlayStation 1 game Medieval is working just fine, and this is right off of our NTFS formatted USB drive, so we're all good to go at this point. I'll exit out of this and let's finally tackle PlayStation 2 as well as PSP games, because those ones are going to be a little bit different. Alright, so first of all, let's just get this out of the way. You will not be able to directly play a PS2 or a PSP game from your USB drive. You cannot do it. The game must be transferred to your console. So with that, before you start going crazy over PS2 and PSP games, go over to your settings, system settings, and go all the way down to system information. Right here, I would recommend looking at your hard drive's free space. So if you're running low on free space, you might want to clear out some stuff or get a larger hard drive, because we are going to need to transfer these games to the internal drive. So first off, how about PS2? Again, if you are a PS3HEN user, this method will not work for you. I'm telling you that right now. If you follow along with PS2 games and you're on PS3HEN, you will be wasting your time with this method, unfortunately. But for jailbroken users, what you can do is go to webMAN Games, PlayStation 2, find your game, which is mine is Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII, and press the X button. Now it's going to start mounting it, but check this out. If we look in the top right corner, it's now going to say copying, as opposed to just mounting it. So your USB drive is going to be flashing with a ton of activity. What we just need to do now is wait at this point. This is a 4 GB or so game. It's just under 4 GB, so it's going to take a little bit of time, but you just need to wait for your USB drive to transfer the game to the internal hard drive. Alright, so here once it's done, it's finally going to say that the game is loaded and it's going to automatically mount it. So just like I showed before, we are going to need to make a memory card, which I need to because I haven't made one for the PS2. So I'm actually going to change this to slot 2, PS2, internal memory card. That's fine. And yep, that's all good. Assign slots. Alright. So now we can come down to our PS2 game and launch it. Alright, so check it out. As you can see, we are booting into Dirge of Cerberus with no issue. So the last one, I mean, we've handled everything else, and the last one is going to be PSP. And for anybody who has a PS3HEN system who might have tapped out, well, guess what? This part's going to be for you as well, because this will work on PS3HEN. So for our last games here, we can go into webMAN, PlayStation Portable, and this one is going to be a little bit different. There's going to be 2 steps. First of all, again, you need to check your internal drive space because PSP games copy over to the internal drive. You cannot play PSP games off of the USB drive. You cannot do it. They have to be copied over. So just like PS2, you just tap X on your desired PSP game. It's now going to begin loading it up here, and it's going to say it's copying. So thankfully this is about half the size of the PS2 game, so it's going to take about half the time, but just like before, let it finish copying over. Alright, so here it's going to say that your PSP game has loaded, but you might be a little bit alarmed because it's not showing up here. Well, this is exactly why we had to install these 2 here. So I'll just break it down real quickly. For regular, just retail PSP games such as this, you want to use the PSP Remaster Launcher. And for PSP Minis, you want to use PSP Launcher. So since this is a regular game, I'm going to load up PSP Remaster Launcher. So now you'll come to this screen where you have the Remaster Launcher as well as Ad Hoc Party. We want the Remaster Launcher, so just press X. And there we go, take a look at that, it just booted up effortlessly. So I wanted to give this some justification here and at least get in-game before leaving you all with this, but as you can see, I mean, I think this might be the most surprising to me. This game here looks so good, like once you actually get in-game, and it's surprisingly good here on the PS3. So yeah, there we go, we have all of our games working just fine on this system, PS1, 2, 3, and PSP. I just wanted to add this real quick here at the end because this was in a recent update to both webMAN mod and prepISO. If you have a NTFS formatted USB drive, you can actually play PSP ISO games directly from that drive as demonstrated right here. Now this update hasn't been moved over to exFAT just yet. I would imagine it would be there in the future, but if you are using exFAT, you still have to do the copy process. So if you want to avoid the copy process and you don't mind using NTFS, it might be worth doing so for your PSP ISO games. So just as some final thoughts on here, if you go into webMAN Games, and if you look at your games here, as you can see, I just restarted the console, so it's only showing what's on my hard drive. My PS2 game is now on my hard drive, my PSP game is now on the hard drive, and if those don't show up, that's totally fine. Make sure your USB drive is plugged in, and just rerun prepISO. Once that's all done, you can come up to webMAN Games, and as you can see, our games are showing up there on the external device. Now, one thing, for any games that you have played, like PS2 games, you're going to see duplicates here. You don't want to run the one that's on the USB drive, just run the one that's on your hard drive. And same thing for PSP games. See, we have the one that's on the USB drive, we don't need that because we have it on the hard drive. And again here, when you come over to any of the launchers, they're actually going to show the last game that you mounted and ran. So if you ever want to change that, you kind of have to just swap it out one at a time, but if you ever want to change that, you just come over to webMAN Games, PSP, and you load up whatever other game you want to play. Once it's copied over and everything is working, you can come back to your launcher and you launch it from there. Anyways, that is about it for this video. I know it was probably a bit to take in here, but there was kind of a bit in regards to exFAT, NTFS, prepISO, setting up webMAN mod, all that fun stuff, as well as, some of the little gotchas here, such as PS2 ISOs not being compatible on PS3HEN with this method, and then the method of loading up PSP games. But at the end here, hopefully you all understand, and hopefully you all have learned a little bit of something with how to play your ISO-based games off of really any type of USB drive on your PS3. Anyways, this Mr. Mario is signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated, and if you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too.